Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining virtually. I am Dr. Varleisha Gibbs, and I'll be sharing a little bit more about my current role and moving forward in regards to my work, in terms of leadership and occupational therapy. You may see that my current title is the Scientific Programs Officer at the American Occupational Therapy Foundation, and I'll be giving you a little bit more info towards the end in regards to where I am and what I'm doing now. So welcome again. The title of our presentation today, as we're getting that pulled up, and Catherine, let me know as well if I just need to share my screen. I do have it there. I happen to have an older laptop, so sometimes it doesn't work that great, but I could try. So today we're going to be talking. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry, Dr. Gibbs. Feel free to share your screen. I'll unshare my screen so you can share, and if that's an issue, then I'll figure it out. I'm having a little bit of trouble accessing OneDrive to access the slide. So I'll just unshare right here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I believe you should have access to share now.
Okay. Are you able to see it or no?
I don't see it yet. Do others?
Not yet.
Okay, let me, 1 second, I'm sorry.
Well, sorry, I have this tendency to the computer.
While Dr. Gibbs is pulling that up, we wanted to once again thank everyone for being here. This is the first time that we have hosted a virtual conference. Our virtual lunch on Thursday was a 2-hour endeavor, so we were able to work out a lot of the technology components of it. But this was a dream that we had back in the fall, that one day we would be able to host some sort of virtual session that would be accessible to practitioners across society. So here we are. Dr. Gibbs, are you ready?
Okay. Yes, can you see it now? Yes? Yeah. All right, yeah. Great. Yeah, as Christina said, I actually did some of my research in telehealth, so you'd be surprised at how I'm still trying to navigate technology after all these years. Yeah, Generation X. So the title for today is "You Can't Be What You Can't See," and I'm going to expand upon that a little bit, because it's not exactly what you think when you hear that. Partially, but we're going to go a little bit beyond. This was a quote by Marian Wright Edelman, and if you're not familiar with Marian, she is the founder of the Children's Defense Fund, and so I encourage you just to look her up in regards to her leadership. She's an advocate for IDEA, which a lot of us have as occupational therapy practitioners really have been working in regards to in our school system based upon a lot of her work. So again, just encourage you to look into Marian Wright Edelman. However, let's move forward with our talk. So the first part of our conversation today that I want us to explore is the concept of cultural identification. And I pulled this quote actually from our AOTA National President, Wendy Hildebrand. And Wendy actually gave this quote, and it was for an editorial piece relating to some funding, and I'll get into that later as well, to support diversity, a diverse workforce in healthcare. And she stated the ability for an occupational therapy client to identify culturally with their occupational therapy practitioner enhances the therapist-client experience. And so I want us to think about this concept of cultural identity, and not so much limiting ourselves to race or ethnicity or religion. So when you think about cultural identity, culture goes beyond that, right? So there's various ways to think about your culture. I personally could identify racially and ethnically to someone else. We may have similarities, but our personal culture may be different. So when we start to think about diversity, we need to think about how we also acknowledge socioeconomic status. That's also an area of culture that we need to be able to expand upon. And I think a lot of the efforts that are going on right now really are going to feed into that and to assist with even having a financial ability to become an occupational therapy practitioner. And I must say, just watching, and listening for the first part of our day, I'm inspired by you all. I thought, the role for me today would be to give you all a little bit of inspiration, but listening to the work of the chapters and the mentor program, what COTAD is doing is amazing. So I just want to commend you all. So these are some images that are personal images of mine, a bit more about my cultural identity. And I'm not going to go too far into how I got into OT, but just a little synopsis. So I grew up in a town called Newcastle, which is in Delaware. And in Newcastle, Delaware, there's a main corridor called Newcastle Avenue, or Newcastle Ave, as we like to call it, Route 9. And the image in the right corner on your screen there is a lot, an empty lot that a lot of times that's what we would see, around our neighborhood and walking on Newcastle Avenue. And to me, growing up there, didn't think much of it. The picture to the left is a picture of myself and my family. My grandfather was very proud and really worked to get his family from Pennsylvania right over the border, actually, to Delaware. And he owned his home. He owned 2 homes. And he worked hard to be able to do that. At the bottom left of your screen, you'll see General Motors. That's where he worked. And that's what really was what fed our lives, which catapulted me into going into furthering my education and being able to do that with his support. My mother, which is, she's on the screen there to the far right in the black top. That was my mother, who was a teen mom. And so I grew up with all the people you see there in that picture in a household where I was the baby, but I kind of grew up, with my aunts. They are somewhat, also mother figures to me, as well as maybe, even sister figures. I don't know. We just have a different but close relationship. And, in that environment, and going back to our quote of the day, you can't be what you can't see. For me, being able to see hard work was something that really led me into wanting to do more. However, the vantage point in that environment was pretty limited, in terms of careers and profession. So I grew up saying, I'm going to be a doctor and a medical doctor. I was going to be a pediatrician because that's what we heard. It's either doctor or lawyer, or you're going to work at the car factory, which was great because, that's what a lot of people in our community did. And I just wanted to share, I threw this in at the last minute because I thought it was important to show that this is the library that's now in that lot that I just showed you on Newcastle Avenue. And this library is beautiful, as you see. It's high tech. They even have a sensory room, which I had a student actually assist in her field work to build their sensory room a few years back. And so showing you that now this is the view that children see when they walk down Newcastle Avenue. So you can see how this vision that someone had in mind is actually now helping to promote and to catapult young children like myself that grew up in a neighborhood. Now they have a different vantage point than I even had. So here are some embarrassing photos that I've never shared, but I thought it was important to add. You see on the far left, Revelations from Alvin Ailey. I grew up loving Alvin Ailey. I started dancing at the age of 2. And to me, seeing Alvin Ailey being actually a very inclusive and diverse dance company, but predominantly African-American dance company. So to see a Black ballerina for me, gave me the vision and a vantage point to be able to then go into dancing. And I danced at Philadelphia in Philadelphia. And knowing that, yeah, if I wanted to be a dancer and if I wanted to be a ballerina, I could do that. You know, that was something that I could see because other people were doing it. On the bottom left of your screen, you see Debbie Turner, and she was a beauty queen, as you can tell. And not only that, but she was a beauty queen who went to get her education and became a doctor, she's a veterinarian. And so I was inspired by someone that could be intelligent and beautiful and go along, you know, to achieve her goals in education. And I remember watching the beauty pageants on TV, and they said, you know, if you apply and you win, you could actually get scholarship money to go to college. So coming from a single parent home, I heard scholarship money, and my mother and I were always trying to write essays and things, whatever I could to be able to fund my college education. That's what we did. So I started doing pageants, which was very eye-opening. Walking into the door with what would become my, actually it was my prom dress. That's what I wore to the pageant. To see females with fur coats and diamond earrings on, yeah, I was a little bit out of my wheelhouse. However, you know, going into that environment, it was kind of eye-opening that maybe I don't belong here, but having that inspiration from someone like her allowed me to see that, yeah, you could. And I was second runner-up a couple years in a row in Delaware. And eventually I won a couple of titles. The one that I'm very proud of is I was Miss Black Student Union at University of Delaware. So that was a title that I was actually able to get. These are some other key players, I would say, in terms of catapulting me into my world, my career. The Forum for Advanced Minorities in Engineering. This is a mentorship program that's been around for years in Delaware. And they have, we actually went to school on the weekends from 7th grade all the way through to graduation. And 2 years, the last 2 years of your high school education, you were able to stay in the summertime at University of Delaware. Staying at University of Delaware made me want to then apply to University of Delaware. That is, you know, does not have a large percentage of minorities, of African American students, but that program was a feeder for students like me that wanted to go into science or healthcare. And being at University of Delaware, I then became a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And that sorority, I tell you, my sorors, my sisters, they were so brilliant that my last year of school, I got a 4.0 GPA because I was inspired by the level of intellect and hard work that they did. So seeing them is what is the reason why I was able to choose continuing going on to get my master's and then again my doctoral degrees. I'm not going to go into why I became an occupational therapist so much because it's a long story. I will say that it was really started by an advisor that told me, you know, you really should look into this profession, just seeing your interest in psychology and science. And I want to share, Tamiko Faison actually has a podcast that she did for Black History Month. And so I encourage you to look her up. If you look on my LinkedIn account and my Twitter, you'll see some posts to those links that not just myself, but other individuals sharing their story about their profession. I'm going to challenge you all right now in the chat, and even when we're done here, I want you to use the hashtag YOTisme. Okay, YOTisme. Share your story, just a quick blurb in the chat. Why do you represent OT? Why did you choose occupational therapy? Let's start sharing that, and I'll get to how we're going to continue that work when we're done. So sight is what you see with your eyes, and vision is what you see with your mind. So not only are we seeing, I saw, you know, individuals that inspired me to be a dancer. I saw individuals that inspired me to go into healthcare. But there also is this piece of vision. Okay, some individuals didn't have that visual representation. Marietta Ng and Dr. Leila Lorenz, they perhaps didn't see themselves represented in occupational therapy. However, they had a vision that they could do it. So I want us to also remember that having a vision is also part of that. It's not the same as sight. However, if we envision something, we too can move forward. And we're going to talk about our vision that we're going to hopefully share when we're done with this, with our day. I think we all would agree that the diversity in our field is limited, and that's part of the reason why COTAD exists. And this is limited on our screen here because it's just showing race. And we're going to go beyond that. But just for our conversation, looking at race and healthcare in the United States. Okay, so healthcare in the US, if you look, for example, at white individuals, 72% of healthcare workers are identified as white. 17.7% identify as Black, 6.9% Asian, and 14.2% Hispanic. But when you look at OT, those numbers decrease significantly, and that's at the bottom of your screen there. And so even though we know that, we have a majority and a minority within the United States, we also have to acknowledge that healthcare in itself has more diversity than occupational therapy does. And so we have our work to do. This was a study by Collins in 2018. Now, they did have a small sample size, but it highlights the fact that underrepresented minority groups, 80% said they never met an occupational therapist, but 51% actually have met physical therapists. So, and this also, their numbers for the other groups were also very limited in terms of actually seeing occupational therapists. So how can we make ourselves more visible? And that's one of our first steps that we're going to talk about. So who we see is important. This was another study by Mead, and they looked at African Americans and non-Puerto Rican Latinos. And the results showed that they were more strongly influenced by the presence of people in the chosen discipline that identified as being part of the same racial or ethnic group. So visually seeing individuals being in a certain discipline was something that influenced their desire to be part of that field. So no more talking, right? It's time for a plan. And I do think, this is a plan for our conversation today, but I know that COTAD is doing the work. I know that you all have plans moving forward, and hopefully this can feed into that a little bit. If you're not familiar with Kotter's 8-step change management model, I encourage you to look into it, get the book, go online, lots of great resources. So we're going to use this as our model. So the first step is creating urgency. Okay, creating urgency. So here is the urgent need. By 2044, more than half of all Americans are going to be projected to belong to a minority group, more than half. And so occupational therapy deserves a seat at the table. We have to be prepared for what society is going to look like moving forward. Society is going to be more diverse, and hence we also need to go on with that change. So we deserve a seat. Here's another reason why this is urgent. This is from Health Professionals for Diversity Coalition. Disparities in healthcare pose a moral and ethical dilemma for our society and threaten to hamper efforts to improve national health. When disparities in healthcare result in missed diagnoses and poor management of chronic conditions, this could translate to higher costs for our healthcare system. So it's beyond just wanting to see diversity, but the lack of diversity can actually impact the cost of healthcare in the US. So what's happening? How are we working on this? We're creating, this is another step in that change model. Creating a powerful coalition is the next step in terms of change, being a change agent. AOTA's board of directors is starting to create a diversity and inclusion task force. And as was mentioned in the start of our day, actually adding a pillar for diversity in Vision 2025. This coalition, along with COTAD, all of our other multicultural organizations, the National Black Occupational Therapy Caucus, that is starting to build that powerful coalition that is part of this change agent model. Creating a vision for change, okay? This is the next step, creating your vision for change. So here's the vision that I am proposing. I'm proposing a vision that looks at the macro, the meso, and the micro levels, okay? So various levels of change. So looking at the macro level, I want you to think if you see yourself as a leader. Do you see yourselves in our leadership? At AOTA, AOTF, do you see yourself in the researchers in our field? How are you, based upon your cultural identity, represented within those groups? And if you don't see yourself, such as, for instance, the Sligo lecture, do we see ourselves in the individual selected for giving that wonderful talk at conference each year? If you don't see yourself, I encourage you to volunteer. And beyond that, support those that you think would be great representatives at that leadership level. I included some of the award winners for one of the grants for AOTF this year. And I think looking at our researchers, we're getting there, looking at the diversity in those award winners for those grants. We are starting to see some diversity, but we need to continue the work. At the meso level, looking at our vision for change, recruiting, retaining, and retaining diverse student bodies, as well as our faculty members and our researchers. So we need to have support for mentors, funded training programs, scholarship programs that are going to support those from diverse populations, as well as supporting those that want to, let's say, go to get their doctoral degree. That takes a lot of sacrifice, it takes a lot of money. So how are we supporting those individuals? If we want the visual representation at these various levels, then how are we going to have the visual representation if those individuals are not able to pursue those degrees? So there needs to be work at this meso level. And at the micro level, membership, okay, making sure that we're supporting AOTA, that we're encouraging our colleagues to be members and participating in our state organizations. So sharing this vision at the state level and making sure at that micro level that we're starting to enhance diversity within our organizations and our state organizations. And wouldn't it be beautiful if our pie chart looked like this, right? That diversity would be as diverse as this pie chart. This is a vision. And it's just a thought that perhaps one day we would get to that in terms of our representation in occupational therapy. The next step in terms of our change model is engaging and enabling organizations. And so in this, communicating the vision is going to be very important. If you look at Cotter's work, he has a book, Our Iceberg is Melting. Okay, and in that book, the penguin is trying to get everyone's attention that the iceberg is going to melt. And one of the steps that he had to do was to put flyers everywhere. He communicated his vision everywhere, even in the water, right? When the penguins jumped into the ice cold water, they would see flyers really demonstrating this vision. We have all these movements that you see on the screen, even the nursing shortage that occurred. I remember hearing about the nursing shortage and I wasn't even in healthcare yet. So how are we displaying this vision and communicating it beyond just us, right? Sometimes I feel like we're preaching to the choir. How are we going to communicate this beyond our cohort that we have here today? Empowering action. Why should we care? So this is to empower us and looking at why we should care. Why we should care is the lack of connection and cultural identity leads to disparities. Okay, so when there's a lack of connection and there's a lack of cultural identification, that is where we start to see disparities within our field. So we need to advocate. right? We deserve it. We deserve to have practitioners from communities experiencing shortages because they don't have therapists that maybe want to come into those communities or therapists that came from those communities. We need to have practitioners who can relate, that can speak the language for our individuals that perhaps English is not their first language, that can share their stories. And that can share their experiences from religion, from socioeconomic status. I know for me personally, if occupational therapists were to go into the community where I grew up and they weren't from there, they may be quite uncomfortable. For me, it's home. So I wouldn't have a problem going to do a home site visitation there. So if we have more individuals from these communities, we can expand our services and have more visual representation in with those populations. So you can be the change, right? You can be the change. And so how do we do this? This is the study by Need again, looking at what are those factors that influence career choice. We know our family members, our friends influence us, our teachers, our mentors, but also pop culture, right? Looking at media resources, media sources. So I want you to do a search on your own time. Google occupational therapy, and I want you to look at the pictures that come up, and these are just a few from a search I recently did. And if you look at the images, there's some diversity, but not a lot. I identify as a Black female. And when I look at the pictures, I do see myself represented there, but it doesn't just stop with me, right? Who else needs to be represented in the images that you see in terms of occupational therapy? I want you to start looking at your pages at work, your business web page, your school institutions web pages. How are we representing diversity on those platforms? These are some of the students and professionals that I worked with in the past, some colleagues and students. And at Wesley College, this is the program I started in Delaware. It's the first and only occupational therapy program there. I was very proud at the diversity that we were able to have in our student body. I can have another talk about why, I think that occurred. Some of it was intentional and some of it just so happened. And you see, we have males represented, we have females, we have African Americans, we have Hispanic, we have Asian. And even working with my colleagues, the picture to the right of your screen all the way at the bottom, that's from University of the Sciences. That was a group of students and myself and a colleague that we were a very diverse group that worked on a research project together. So sharing those images, that is a start for a place where we can start. I want us to start thinking about our colleagues that may have disabilities, right? What about our individuals that may have physical or even mental illness and diagnoses that are our colleagues working in a field that can relate even more so with our clients. I had a student that was visually impaired, and she actually was identified as being, legally blind, and she had a CNI dog. I had another student that had a traumatic brain injury, and occupational therapy was a second career for her. How are we supporting those individuals? And I will say that there are organizations, even within AOTA, that do support our colleagues that have disabilities. So I encourage you to get involved with those groups as well. There are organizations with AOTA that support our Native American colleagues. And I want to include this because I've met across the country, I've met different practitioners that work on our reservations, and they all share that there is a lack of resources, there's a lack of attention, there's a lack of support for the individuals that live on the reservations. And there's so much need. And there's a need for cultural sensitivity with our Native American colleagues and clients. This is the Hiawassee Pony tribe in North Carolina. And actually, I share this picture in itself because this is where my grandmother actually came from. So I'm personally trying to connect to that side of my culture and my heritage a little bit more. So that's why I chose this specific image. Also learning from our peers who identify as LGBTQ plus. I always get that, it's a tongue twister for me. Looking at this community for guidance, for working with our clients. They may also identify as being part of that community. There are different things that we may not be aware of or think about that we can address with support from those individuals. Mentorship. I'm so excited to hear about COTAD's mentorship program. Even if you can't do this formally, this is one of my mentees, Maria. I also have a mentee, Fatimata, and she's from Howard University, occupational therapy program. And I take moments out when they reach out to me, or I'll check in with them. It doesn't have to be completely structured if you don't have a lot of time. For Maria, I attended one of her career days for elementary school students. So from, you know, the fourth graders, I believe, up to middle school, I was able to introduce them to occupational therapy. If I could chisel out a little bit of my day to do that, I'm planting seeds so that hopefully in the future, they could see that, yeah, I could be an occupational therapist as well. It's time for us to also envision our future. So if we're looking at how are we putting out a visual representation of occupational therapy, we need to expand beyond the clinic, beyond the skilled nursing facility, even beyond the school. And I took these images from, this is from Utah, the University of Utah, as well as WashU, that have programs that are really working in a community with immigrants, as well as working in primary care. And so this is a way for us to really show occupational therapy's value. And these individuals then could say, yes, I've actually seen an occupational therapist. I know what they do, at least from this environment. I'm familiar with occupational therapy. And that's how we also expand the vision. This is another quote from Marian Wright Edelman, and I won't go too far into it, but the quote pretty much talks about connection, and that it's not so much seeing diversity, right? Seeing diversity, but when we have diversity, this is actually a sense of connection, and we need to live in a global sense of inclusivity, right? All of us being part of that connection. And I know right now more than ever, we are apart, but I think we're actually starting to feel a little bit more connected to other people, even virtually. I think that's, you know, the blessing out of this chaos that we're having with the pandemic is that people are starting to connect more. So here's an opportunity, right? We can see this as an opportunity to really expand in terms of inclusivity and diversity. So tell your story. AOTA has a page. I put it here for you to look at, and you can search on AOTA's website to share your story. I try as much as I can to share my story so that I can be a visual and a vision perhaps for other people that come from different walks of life. So it's a platform for you to do the same. And when we're looking at change models, sharing small wins is very important. And today, COTAD has done that, right? Sharing some of the work that's been done. So here's a small win, which actually I think is a big win, right? For us, and we're getting there, is the Allied Health Workforce Diversity Act that was introduced to the Senate. So it passed in the House and it was introduced in the Senate. This bill will help to support individuals from underrepresented minority groups to pursue allied health careers and to have that funding to do that. This is a seed that has been planted, and when this starts to come to fruition, I think it's going to do great things for us in terms of diversity. If you go to AOTA's webpage and the action page there, you can help to take action. You can be part of supporting bills like this to increase diversity. So what's next? These are the action steps I'm leaving with you today, okay? Because I feel like we have a lot of conversations, but what are some things you can do right now, after I finish talking perhaps, and today? So communicating the vision. Target your social media, okay? So target your social media. Share occupational therapy, not just on your professional page, but your page that you have with your friends, the page that you share when you go on vacation. Talk a little bit about occupational therapy. Share some of those social media posts. I shared one the other night when the doctor was talking about the pandemic, and she mentioned occupational therapy. And I was so excited that I went straight to Twitter and shared it, right? So hopefully not just our OT colleagues will see that, but even beyond. Look at your program web pages. Look at your web pages at your job. How are you communicating? What do your pamphlets look like? Who's on the front? Who's inside of those brochures? Offer your personal stories, okay, and share your story about diversity and inclusion. I've gotten to the point where I am comfortable with saying, I would like to see more Black practitioners, right? I am a Black female, and we have to be unapologetic about how you identify personally, because that's who we are. We're all different, and it's okay to connect to that. Empower action. So empower other people. Mentor. I see that COTAD needs mentors. Step into that role. And if you can't do that, informally be a mentor to someone. FAME for me was a catalyst. That was that program I shared earlier on that introduced me to the University of Delaware. I feel like we need more formal programs like that, where we have internships, where we have cohorts of students that can come in, even if it's for a day or two, that they're exposed to our field. Advocate and be part of community outreach, such as career days, as I shared that I have done. Share your small wins, and post. I gave you the hashtag #WhyOTIsMe. Post that on your pages and share some of the wins that you have had. Have you gotten a promotion, or have you simply gotten your client to discharge successfully and had a unique treatment plan for them? Share those things. Implementing change is our final step. So addressing case studies that you are using. If you are if you're teaching, if you're an instructor or a professor, how are you addressing diversity in your case studies, in the literature, and your assignments, and even in your examinations? How are you including diversity within those stories that you're telling? How are we including diversity within our research? Who we're researching, who we're including as researchers, as clinical researchers that could be part of our team. Volunteer for AOTA, COTAD, the National Black Occupational Therapy Caucus, all of those different organizations that they have for our Asian practitioners, our Hispanic practitioners, and those that identify as LGBTQ+. And communicate this vision even with your state organizations. Communicate the vision. So going back to Cotter's 8-step change, we're getting there, right? We're getting close to this, but we need to do more. And I'm really happy to see the work again that COTAD is doing. And I do want to share that a small win, I feel, for our profession. I'm very pleased to announce that I am leaving the foundation, and not pleased that I'm leaving there, but pleased to step into a new role at AOTA. So I'm starting as a Vice President of Practice Engagement and Capacity Building at our association. So that is my new position that I have now stepped into. And I'm hoping to do more connection with COTAD and our other groups to be able to increase the diversity within our field. So I am very thankful for that, and for all the dreams I don't have to close my eyes to see anymore. And with that, I thank you all, and I will open it up for questions.